Hello, good evening. Once again, I welcome all of you to another episode of The Last Clue Story. I hope you and your loved ones are safe, healthy, and looking after each other. Tonight's case is about a family whose life over a span of nearly 3 decades remains one of the strangest mysteries you'll ever hear. It begins in the 1970s with a man named Warren. He lived with his wife Ruth, their young daughter Pauline, and their son. On the surface, they seemed like an ordinary family, living a quiet life. But behind closed doors, things were very different. Warren had a dark habit. He drank heavily. And when he drank, his temper became uncontrollable. Arguments would erupt, often turning violent. Ruth endured it for years, but one day, she had enough. She packed her things, took her children, and left. From that moment, Warren lived alone. Ruth moved in with her son and daughter, trying to give them a calmer life. Then came the incident that would change everything. Pauline was just 7 years old when it happened. One afternoon, her mother, Ruth, suddenly said to her, "Let's go for a walk." Pauline didn't know it yet, but that short walk would be the first step into a mystery that would haunt the family for the next 20-30 years. Ruth took Pauline and her younger brother for what seemed like an ordinary walk. But instead of returning home, they boarded a bus to another city, Winnipeg. A few days later, Ruth looked at her children and said something that stunned Pauline. "We will never go back home." Pauline was only 7 years old, but sharp enough to realize what that meant. Back home, her father was still there, as were her relatives, her school, and the life she knew. Why would her mother suddenly say they were never going back? Ruth gave no explanation. Her voice was firm. They were staying here now. It was a difficult adjustment, leaving behind a comfortable house, close family, friends, and even her father. But Ruth's decision was final. So Pauline and her brother began a new life in Winnipeg. Time passed. By the time Pauline turned 11, Ruth had another announcement. "We're moving again." By now, Pauline had grown used to it. In the 4 years since they'd left her father, they had already lived in 6 different cities, and Pauline had attended 6 different schools. Each time she made new friends, found a new home, and then had to leave it all behind. She didn't understand why her mother kept changing cities, but she had stopped asking. Moving had become part of her life. And so, at the age of 11, she packed her things once more, ready to start over yet again, without knowing why. Over the years, Pauline began noticing something strange. In many of the cities they lived in, there was always a man who seemed to be close to her mother. He wasn't family, and he didn't live with them all the time, but she would see him often. One day, she finally learned his name, Stan. Looking back, she realized that whenever they moved to a new city, Stan would somehow appear there too, always around her mother, always part of the background. Pauline began to suspect that Stan wasn't just another friend. He was something more. Still, life kept moving. The cities kept changing, and so did the schools. By the time Pauline turned 23, she had lived in more places than most people could imagine. At last, she settled in New Brunswick, where she landed a job at a local newspaper. For the first time in her life, things felt stable. But in the quiet moments, the old questions came back, the ones that had haunted her since childhood. From the age of 5 to 7 to 12 to 13, her mother had kept moving them from one city to another, never explaining why. She never took them to see their relatives. She ignored any questions about their father. Pauline had asked her mother countless times, but each time, Ruth would brush it off, changing the subject or walking away. Now, working among journalists, surrounded by people who chased down the truth for a living, Pauline felt the urge grow stronger. She decided she needed answers. This time, she would ask her mother again, only now she wouldn't take silence for an answer. Meanwhile, these questions kept swirling in Pauline's mind. Then, one day, she received an unexpected phone call from her mother, Ruth. Her voice was calm, but the words were startling. "Pauline, I've known the questions in your mind for years, 18, maybe 20 years. And now I want to give you the answers. I want to tell you my secret. Meet me at a motel." Living alone because of her job, Pauline was taken aback. For years, she had been desperate to know the truth, why her mother kept moving from city to city, why she avoided her father and relatives, why she never let her children settle down. And now, finally, she was going to hear it. She arrived at the motel on time. As she approached the entrance, she was startled to see Stan, her mother's longtime acquaintance. For Pauline, he was still a stranger, but she knew he wasn't a stranger to her mother. Stan walked up to her and handed her an envelope. "Read this, then come inside," he said. Inside the envelope was a note in her mother's handwriting. "Remove all the jewelry you are wearing. Place it in this envelope. Say nothing. Then come inside." Pauline froze for a moment. Why would her mother ask this? Still, she recognized the writing and decided to follow the instructions. One by one, she removed her jewelry, placed it in the envelope, and handed it back to Stan. Then she stepped inside the motel room. Her mother was seated, waiting. Pauline sat down across from her, tension building in the silence. A few seconds later, Stan entered the room and closed the door. Pauline's confusion deepened. What was happening? Her mother looked directly at her and said, "I know you've been asking these questions since you were a child, why I hid things from you and your brother, why we kept changing cities, why I never let you stay in one place, why I never allowed you to have a normal education." Ruth took a deep breath and spoke slowly. "Pauline, since you were a child, a mafia has been after us. Our entire family has been their target. They want to kill us. And for the past 18 years, I've been running from city to city just to keep you and myself alive." Pauline stared at her in disbelief. "A mafia? After us? For 18 years?" The words felt unreal. But why? She finally asked. That's when Stan stepped forward. "It started years ago," he began. "I knew a man who was part of a dangerous gang. Somehow I convinced him to leave that life. I broke his ties with the gang, turned him around. But when the gang found out, they killed him. Then they discovered it was me who had persuaded him to leave. That's when they came after me." Stan paused, his eyes fixed on Pauline. "Your father, Warren, was also involved with a similar gang. Later, for the sake of the family, he distanced himself from them. That made him their enemy too. And when the gang couldn't reach him, they turned their attention to your mother. They wanted her dead. And because I had already crossed them, I became a target as well." He glanced at Ruth. "Since then, I've stayed close to your mother, protecting her. The Secret Services know about it. They've been helping us. Whenever we get a warning, we leave immediately, moving to another city. That's why you kept changing schools, losing friends, and starting over again and again. That's why your childhood was spent on a run." Pauline sat frozen. The story sounded like something out of a crime novel. Could it really be true? Could a family be hunted for 18 years and still be alive? She wanted to dismiss it as paranoia. But then fragments of memory came back, odd moments from her childhood. The hurried departures. The way her mother would suddenly pack without explanation. The shadowy faces she sometimes saw in the distance. For the first time, Pauline wondered if the unbelievable might actually be true. Memories began flashing through Pauline's mind, moments from her childhood that had never made sense until now. She remembered one evening when she and her mother came home. Dinner was already prepared, steaming on the table. But just as they sat down to eat, Ruth suddenly grabbed all the food, carried it outside, and threw it away. Pauline had been stunned. What kind of behavior was this? Now, hearing the story, she understood her mother had suspected the food had been poisoned by a gangster. Throwing it away had been an act of survival. Another night, long ago, she had been jolted awake in the middle of the night. Ruth's voice was urgent. "We have to leave." No. They walked out of the house into the cold darkness, eventually climbing up a nearby mountain. There, in the open, they spent the entire night. By morning, they were in a new city. Then there was the time they returned home, and her mother suddenly announced that all their socks were made of plastic. Confused, Pauline asked why. Ruth's answer was chilling. Someone had spilled a lethal chemical on the ground, something so toxic it could kill them just by seeping through the skin of their feet. Piece by piece, these strange events started to make sense. Maybe her mother had been telling the truth all along. Stan and Ruth continued speaking. Finally, Stan revealed the last detail. "I'm not just a family friend. I'm connected to a secret department. The people I work with are part of the secret services. They've been protecting me for years, and now they've tasked me with protecting your mother and you. Whenever there's danger, they alert us. That's why your mother moves instantly, without warning. That's why you've spent your life running." For Pauline, the puzzle pieces were beginning to fit, but the picture they formed was more terrifying than she had ever imagined. At last, Ruth revealed the final piece of her story. "Stan has been protecting me for 16 years, she said softly. "In that time, we've grown close. I fell in love with him, and he fell in love with me. But neither of us could admit it until recently. Now we've decided to be together to get married." "I've already left your father, Pauline." Pauline sat frozen, the weight of every answer, every revelation crashing down on her. She didn't know what to feel. Before she left, Ruth and Stan handed her a small transmitter. "If you ever feel in danger, press this button. It will send an alert, and it will come for you immediately," Stan instructed. Pauline returned home with a device in her hand, but her mind was far from at peace. Her mother had also told her something else, something darker. Many of their relatives, she claimed, had been killed because of this mafia connection, and the same people were still after them. Pauline listened quietly, but deep down, she couldn't bring herself to believe it completely. Something about it didn't add up. Her mother, however, refused to doubt Stan's version of events. "What Stan says is true," she insisted. "We're in danger. That's why we keep moving." For nights, Pauline lay awake, replaying the conversation in her mind. Was her family truly being hunted? Or was there something else her mother wasn't telling her? She didn't know, but she needed to find out. She made a decision. She would uncover the truth, no matter how long it took. At the time, Pauline had a boyfriend she had planned to marry, but she ended the relationship telling him, "I can't spend my life with you not now. I need to know the biggest secret of my life. I don't know how long it will take or if I'll even survive. My mother says there's danger, and maybe she's right, but I have to know the truth. Until I find it, I can't be with anyone. This is my duty." After everything, Pauline decided to distance herself completely from Stan. She left her job and began her own search for the truth behind her mother's story. During this time, she lived alone, away from both of them. Then, one day, her mother called with an urgent message. "We've received news there's danger. We need to go underground." Pauline agreed. If going underground meant she could be closer to her mother, maybe she could finally uncover the truth. By then, Ruth had married Stan. He was now officially Pauline's stepfather. When Pauline arrived, she expected immediate action, disappearing into hiding. But days passed, and nothing happened. They went about their daily routines as if the warning had never been given. Pauline began to suspect that something was off. She decided to take matters into her own hands. If her mother and Stan wouldn't reveal the truth, she would force it out through a sting operation. Her plan was simple: create a crisis, watch how they reacted. One day, she called her mother, her voice trembling, pretending to be terrified. "I just got home. The windows are smashed. There's a tunnel dug into my house someone broke in. I think they were searching for something." Her mother immediately said, "Wait, I'll tell Stan." A short while later, Stan called back. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll tell you everything. 2 people have been arrested for breaking into your house. They had your picture with them. They were looking for something specific inside." Pauline listened in silence, then let out a short laugh. "Stan, there was no break-in. No tunnel. I made it up to test you. And you just told me people were arrested, and they had my picture. Why are you lying?" Stan froze, his face drained of color. Ruth stepped in quickly. "Pauline, you shouldn't talk like this. You need to trust Stan." But Pauline's voice was steady. "No, Mother. This is a lie." After some time, Pauline began to see things differently. She still wasn't sure how much of her mother's story was true. Maybe her mother wasn't lying, but perhaps her mother herself didn't know the real truth. And if that was the case, one person remained at the center of it all: Stan. Pauline started thinking from her childhood to her teenage years. Every city they moved to, every sudden escape, every warning, it all traced back to Stan. But why? If all he wanted was to marry her mother, he could have done that without uprooting an entire family for decades. What was his real motive? Determined to find out, Pauline distanced herself from her mother and began investigating Stan's past, where he came from, who he knew, and what he had done before meeting her family. The results surprised her. On paper, Stan looked like an ordinary, decent man. No criminal record. No links to the mafia. No ties to gangsters. No history of violence. No threats made to anyone. If he wasn't connected to organized crime, then why had he been spinning this elaborate story for so many years? The deeper Pauline dug, the more puzzled she became. Finally, her research led her to a mind scientist, a specialist in human behavior and mental health. Pauline explained everything in detail: how, from the age of 7, her mother had taken her and her brother from city to city, always in fear of some mafia or gangster who was supposedly after them. How the police had supposedly confirmed the danger many times. How her mother's entire belief in this threat came from one source, Stan. And now Pauline wanted to know, was this really the truth, or had their entire life been built on a lie? The mind scientist listened to Pauline's story in complete silence, asking careful questions and noting every detail. Then, after conducting her own research and reviewing similar cases, she finally gave Pauline an answer. "There's only one explanation," she said. "Stan is suffering from a mental disorder, a rare psychological condition known as Folie. She explained that this syndrome, often called shared psychosis, occurs when one person lives in a self-created fantasy world, confusing dreams, delusions, and imagined events for reality, and then convinces others to believe in that false reality as well. In Stan's case, she continued, whatever he imagines, he believes is absolute truth. If he dreams at night that someone is trying to kill him, he wakes up convinced it is real. He doesn't see it as imagination, he sees it as proof. And when such a person finds someone who trusts them, they pass this belief on. Stan, she explained, might have once dreamt that he had fought with a gangster who swore revenge. In his dream, the gangster was coming after him, his family, and especially his wife. To Stan, this wasn't just a nightmare, it was a threat that demanded action. In the 1970s, by sheer coincidence, Stan met Ruth, Pauline's mother. For reasons the scientist could only speculate, Stan became convinced that Ruth's husband, Warren, was somehow his enemy, working with dangerous criminals to harm him. And he didn't just believe it himself, he made Ruth believe it too. From there, it all spiraled. Stan told Ruth her husband had poisoned her food. He warned her that deadly chemicals had been placed in the house. He insisted they wear plastic socks to protect themselves. And Ruth, fully convinced Stan was telling the truth, uprooted her life and the lives of her children for decades, running from a danger that may have never existed. One night, without warning, Stan told Ruth in a low, urgent voice, "You have half an hour. Leave the house immediately and go somewhere deserted." There was fear in his eyes, a fear that Ruth had learned never to question. She gathered Pauline and her brother, and together they fled to the mountains, shivering in the cold night air. There, Stan revealed the same terrifying tale his enemies had found them again. Ruth believed him. She always did. She didn't know that the enemy existed only in Stan's mind, a shadow born from a dream. From then on, whenever Stan claimed that his enemies had entered their city, the pattern repeated. They moved. First to one city, then another, third, fourth, fifth, never stopping. Stan was always with them. He left his own family behind, isolating himself entirely. And in the process, he ruined Ruth's life too, cutting her off from her husband, forcing her into constant flight. Pauline and her brother were only children, and they had no choice but to follow. For years, the three of them wandered, trapped in the prison of Stan's imagination, all because of a dream that had never been real. There's no enmity, no gangster, no danger. It was only after Pauline met the mind scientist that she finally learned the truth. Stan's visions were nothing but a product of his illness. Ruth, too, had been a victim, believing every word because she trusted him. That truth changed something in Pauline. She forgave her mother. She understood that the fear and chaos of her childhood were not born from malice, but from misplaced trust. Years later, Ruth was diagnosed with cancer. In her final days, Pauline stayed by her side. She watched her mother take her last breath. And before she died, Pauline made peace. She let go of the pain, knowing her mother's life had also been destroyed by the same dream. In the end, she realized sometimes the greatest tragedies are not caused by enemies in the real world, but by the ones we create in our own minds. In the years that followed, Stan never mistreated Pauline or her brother again. When he had married their mother, they were just children, and in his own way, he took care of them as if they were his own. When Pauline grew up and married, Stan even fulfilled a father's duty, making sure her wedding took place. But despite these gestures, Pauline could never bring herself to forgive him. She knew now that Stan had no malicious intent. He was a man trapped inside the walls of his own mind, a mind sickened by a disease that blurred the line between dreams and reality. His mother had believed his every word, and because of that belief, they spent years wandering from city to city, running from enemies that had never existed. Pauline understood he hadn't meant to destroy their lives. Yet deep inside, she could not forget that he had stolen her and her brother's entire childhood. Her mother, lost in that same misunderstanding, had unknowingly forced them all to live in the shadow of a dream. She carried no hatred, only the knowledge that Stan had been a sick man. In time, his illness claimed his life. Pauline moved forward. She built a happy life with her husband and children. Her brother, too, found his own path, but the past never truly left them. Years later, her brother decided to write a book. He had kept their family story hidden for decades, partly because their mother had never allowed him to speak of it while she was alive. But now with both Stan and their mother gone, he felt the world should know the truth. In the book, he revealed how their family had spent nearly 20 years living inside the fabric of Stan's imagination, chasing fears that belonged only to his dreams, never to reality. It was a strange tale, a mystery without a villain, a tragedy without a crime. A family's life wrapped not in danger, but in a dream. That's all for today's story. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and never ignore the last clue. Then hit that subscribe button now, because the next tale might just be the one that haunts you forever. Subscribe because the truth won't wait. I'll see you next time with another chilling, unforgettable story. Until then, take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for watching.